SBC Media.
Welcome to iGaming Daily, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe. Supported by SBC Summit Barcelona, the industry-leading conference bringing you the future of sports betting and iGaming.
SBC Summit Barcelona is where you can experience the entire global industry coverage under one roof. Join 10,000 industry professionals for 3 days of game-changing conversation and education. Get your tickets now at sbcevents.com.
Hollywood may be in the midst of an actors and writers strike, yet for those seeking drama and intrigue, SBC recommends tuning into gambling companies' upcoming interim results published this summer. H1 trading has seen European gambling publicly limited companies navigate the toughest of regulatory adjustments across multiple markets amid a backdrop of business conflicts impacting investor relations and future options. Pressure mounts on the leadership of European plcs to deliver blockbuster results, satisfying investors' expectations. Failure could well see a change in cast and direction for Europe's giants. I'm James Ross, and today on iGaming Daily, sponsored by SBC Summit Barcelona, we have the return of Tedward as Edward Menway and Ted Omclay join us once again to look ahead to H1 results. And later on in the show, we'll also be reaching out to SBC America's editor, Jessica Welman, who will be providing a report from her time at the National Council of Legislators from Gaming State's summer meeting in Denver last week. We'll get straight into it. So, Edward, I'll come to you first. Can you just explain kind of the content and significance of these H1 results?
So, H2 2023, it comes with, it's basically the return of gambling to a kind of post-COVID normalized trading environment. Yeah. We've seen kind of 12 months without any kind of, any COVID hurdles. And then it's amid also kind of the backdrop of how gambling PLCs in Europe are adjusting to regulatory updates across Europe. And then I think if you're going to focus on the significance, I think you're going to you have to look at kind of the pressure that's being applied by the investors on the gambling PLCs to perform, but to get to particular outcomes by the end of the year, be it by M&As or the valuation of the companies and where they stand in the respective markets. So there's a lot at stake and there's a lot of pressure on leadership to get there.
Yeah, I mean, well, an excellent summary from Ted there. I mean, I think he's really hit the nail on the head with that one. Yeah, as you said, you know, we're now, certainly in Europe, well and truly have returned to normal in comparison to the COVID. So, you know, the impact of that. In 2022, we're still sort of feeling the lingering effects of it, both economically and socially. And now, yeah, as I said, things have returned solidly to normal. And we're sort of seeing how is the sector itself responding to that. We'll see that in these H1 results. The other big thing is obviously a topic that we've touched on quite a bit lately, quite regularly on this podcast, is the regulatory changes across Europe in the likes of the UK, the Nordics, the Netherlands, Germany, France, and so on, and how the markets are adjusting to these, and in turn, how will that be reflected from a commercial standpoint and a business standpoint in these interim results. I think it will be quite telling.
In your answer there, you mentioned about Nordic companies, and now there's two Nordic giants in Kindred and Betsson. Can you just provide a bit of insight into what we could probably expect from them?
From what I understand, Betsson have already released some, I believe, some preliminary results, haven't they? Which is showing that they've been doing quite well. They're getting some positive impact from across their European trading. They've also, from what I remember, they've been making some inroads in the US lately as well. I think they might be going more down the B2B route there, perhaps as a way of competing with some of the big B2C giants. So things are looking quite positive for them. But on the other hand, Kindred, who, despite having actually some decent results in their last earnings call, 2022 results are an improvement on 2021, but not catching up to 2019. We've also seen the very highly publicised leadership changes in their organisation, and they are coming up against a couple of regulatory hurdles in their founding market of the Nordics, and all of this is ultimately, obviously, again, quite highly publicised has led to talks of a potential merger or sale of the company. So it's very contrasting stories regarding the two leading Nordic companies of Betsson and Kindred.
Yeah, can I add to that? Look, I mean, when we look at the Nordic companies, they're always the early foghorn for performance of the European PLCs. They are always announced their interims earlier than the UK or other countries, gambling firms. And again, it's what to look at now. Kindred results haven't matched up to 2019. However, look, I think in Kindred, it's going to be what are the investors looking at in their numbers, right? What is indicating that the company's having a turnaround? And again, with Kindred, it will go down to kind of their exposure in the Nordic markets and in highly regulated jurisdictions such as Holland, Belgium, also the UK too, how they're performing out there, what kind of a beta they're generating in there, can they catch up to kind of 2019, their kind of 2019 conditions. I think that's what the investors are going to be focused on there.
Let's look a little bit closer to home for us. We obviously have the likes of Entain and Flutter. And Edward, I'll come back to you. Can you just provide a little bit of update on kind of potentially their H1 results, and also who needs, in your opinion, a blockbuster first quarter?
Okay, good question. I mean, look, if you're analysing the performance of the Brit Pack, let's call them, and I think, look, the ones grabbing the headline at the moment are 888 and Entain. As you're well aware from last week's news concerning 888 have gone through what can only be described as 12 months of trauma. And we got another flashpoint last week about their license being put up by investigation. They're a company that can't catch a break. And also their investors need to know what is kind of the long-term vision for 888, how they're going to turn around the William Hill, the William Hill subsidiary in the UK and Europe. And also the leadership changes there. There's been so much leadership change. I mean, it's who's coming to take over the ship. 888 are definitely the ones to look out for. They're definitely the ones causing the narratives in these interim results.
Again, I think I just couldn't really agree more with what Ted said. I think 888 are probably the big one with regards to who really needs a blockbuster Q1 due to some of the uncertainty surrounding them. Entain as well, of course, the big sort of shareholder clash there is regarding its planned buyout of it's agreed buyout of STS. So I think obviously if they record quite a very positive H1, then that should soothe a lot of shareholder concerns and get a lot more confidence around them. Then the other big one, of course, is with Flutter and their plans for the US, becoming a lot more focused on that, and how will we see them juggling their historic European business with these new North American opportunities in the sort of gold rush that's been happening over there over the past couple of years?
I'd just like to add, look, I mean, I think if you're analysing the UK gambling PLCs, and I think you're looking at kind of three companies with three very, very different strategies and three very different options and processes, and three different kind of strategies and how they're handling their investors at the moment. So AAA, it's all about kind of the turnaround, whether they're undervalued and whether they can turn around the performance in the UK. Entain, there's always the shadow of, will they get that merger deal happening with BetMGM? And I think a lot of investors now are saying, look, we need to kind of see that story getting pushed forward. We need to have kind of transparency on what's going to happen by the end of the year. And then you have Flutter, who are, yes, you could argue their own podium place. They have grown existentially since 2020. And it's kind of their strategy to become kind of global gaming's number one PLC. and their traction in the US and how they're growing kind of their international portfolio.
I've got a question for both you, and I'll start with little Ted. As an investor, if you were an investor, what would you want to see from European gambling PLCs in these results?
I mean, that's a very broad, wide-ranging question, isn't it? I guess. I think for me personally, I just want to be able to see an ability to remain sort of stable, but also flexible to adapt and navigate to all these various like shifting regulatory and market conditions that are happening across a lot of the core sort of jurisdictions across Europe, from the UK to France to Germany to Italy to the Netherlands, an ability to make sure that your business is resilient enough and adaptable enough to continue making progress in each of these, despite whatever changes might be coming your way.
It's a risky market out there, and I think that investors now need kind of confidence in the bottom line of operators. So again, as Ted said, look, in Europe, it's how are you adjusting to kind of to these highly regulated markets, but on top of that, it's whether you can still take out market share, whether your strategy can still take out market share of the likes of the UK, in the Nordics, Germany, the Netherlands, and at what expense. So, okay, in prior years, we saw like a lot of focus on the EBITDA. I think now it's going to turn towards kind of bottom line profits, especially in Europe. If we turn to the US, and especially for Entain and Flutter, it's will they turn their operations profitable there in 2023? What does that roadmap look like, and how much profits they're going to generate? I mean, they spent so much money out there on a quarter by quarter basis. You're now kind of looking to see what is the result of that. What is the bottom line of the US? What type of businesses have they built out there? And can these businesses survive without a kind of multi-million pound spend on promos, on marketing? So this is the significance of these interim results. We kind of finally get to see what's in the pudding.
And Ted, just to wrap up this podcast, what else should the listeners be looking out for on SBC News as well, with these H1 results?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different ones. Obviously, you got Lottomatica in Italy. They made their debut on the exchange over there not too long ago. They've been making some good progress, establishing quite a strong position in the market. You've also got FDJ, who have been making a lot of inroads on their B2B side of things internationally. Obviously, in France, they've obviously got a monopoly, and one of the leading companies there. But their B2B operations have been expanding across Europe, and they also acquired, I hope I don't butcher the name, Z-Turf in the Netherlands, getting involved more in like the betting and horse racing B2C side of things there. Playtech have obviously we've talked about this before on the podcast, I believe, sort of re-established themselves as like, a good solid publicly listed B2B brand. Maybe some other ones as well could, potentially Supergroup. I know obviously they're listed on the NYSE, but they are based they're one of the companies based in the Channel Islands. Betway and Spin, both solid brands there. I think they've had a few drags lately, but if we could see if they could gain some more momentum, they could be an interesting one to keep an eye on. And perhaps also FL Entertainment, who have the BetClick and Bet at Home brands, which again are pretty solid, strong brands that recorded some decent growth in their last results. Although that company, FL Entertainment, I think from what I remember, their media side of the business didn't do as well as betting. But again, could be one just to keep your eye on. Edward, anything for you to wrap up the podcast?
I think, look, if we're looking at the interims, and I think they'll tell just how hard it is for European gambling, just how well the European gambling PLCs have adjusted to their regulatory demands. also you'll kind of get to see kind of the changing nature of a gambling PLC. Now, I've spoken to a lot of kind of commentators and observers of gambling, and I think one of the things that we're now going to start to see is we're going to see a rupture in tier one and what we call kind of the biggest operators, tier one operators. And I think that this was highlighted, especially in the case of Kindred by Andreas Storm, the founder, that he was, look, we spend millions and millions of pounds a month, but we're not even touching kind of the top tier of gaming. And everything seems to have gone up in scale and in cost. So I think what 2023 points to is that we're now going to see a breakaway from the tier ones. And I think you're going to have these super gambling groups coming into play. And that happens from these results onwards.
Perfect. And anything on these results and onwards will be on SBC News, as Edward and Ted will be covering it pretty much as it happens. So keep an eye out for that on the websites. Anything that we talked about today in today's podcast, I'll leave a link in the description below so listeners can go and check SBC News' website out. And on that, Ted and Edward, thank you for joining me today. But the show isn't over. The podcast still goes on because, as I mentioned in the introduction, SBC America's editor, Jessica Welman, is now, she's done a report from the National Council of Legislators from gaming states, and this is what she experienced last week.
Hey guys, it's SBC America's editor, Jessica Welman, and I am fresh back from a trip to the Mile High City, Denver, for the summer meeting of NCLGS, the National Council of Legislators from gaming states. An incredible event, a great couple of days. For those who aren't familiar, this conference brings together primarily lawmakers and regulators and key stakeholders, lots of lobbyists from the gaming industry to talk all facets of gaming, from tribal to lottery to parimutuels to, of course, sports betting and iGaming. I was able to attend for my first event, and I was thrilled to be there. It was very well attended and represented, and even included a bunch of Swifties. We happened to be in downtown Denver the same time Taylor Swift came to town. The lobby was a nice mix of people in conference wear and a whole bunch of glitter and sparkle. A lot of sparkle. So, in honor of Miss Taylor Swift herself, I'm going to theme my 3 takeaways from NCLGS to Taylor Swift songs, starting with Speak Now. The keynote on the first day from Tipico SVP of Business Development for U.S., Stephen Krombold, didn't full out say how mad they were at Ohio for doubling the tax rate under the cover of the budget bill a couple of weeks ago, but he did point out that Tipico, one of the operators who did go into Ohio, said that he signed market access deals that were 10-year agreements based on assumptions about how that market was going to be handled. So he also pointed out that, sure, FanDuel and DraftKings and BetMGM and Caesars can handle these big changes, but for smaller operators, and, caveat, we all know Tipico is huge overseas, huge in Europe, especially in Germany. But in terms of U.S. market share and presence, not the biggest operator. These are the ones being most adversely affected by this. A similar thing came to light, not from the conference, but while I was there, I was informed that the new Tennessee laws also made a change that was disruptive, less so to operators and more to suppliers and vendors in the state. Previously, you just had to register with the state to have a license. Now there's a tiered structure of license fees for suppliers there, with geolocation and platform providing services costing $150,000 for 3-year licenses, all the way down to some of the smaller providers spending more like $45,000 for a 3-year license. Either way, again, something big operators or big suppliers can easily handle. Less easy for those smaller suppliers, though, to find that money, given that they went into a market thinking they didn't have to pay these hefty license fees. So, on behalf of the smaller operators, Stephen Krombold did indeed speak now. Next up, bad blood. And we've got 2 of these. First, skill games in general have a lot of bad blood in the industry, but I think the group that perhaps is most concerned about them are the lottery. The state lotteries, both the director of the Missouri Lottery and the director of the Pennsylvania Lottery, directly address the proliferation of these gray machines that are showing up in convenience stores across their states and gas stations across their states. PA Lottery Director Drew Svitko actually pointed out that because of the research they do, they see that as soon as one of these machines goes into a gas station, it actually does directly cannibalize the scratch-off sale tickets at that venue. Spoke with him after to just see, they've been tracking this data since about 2017, which is also when the state launched video gambling terminals at truck stops. And what Svitko explained to me was that it's not the same. You don't see that cannibalization because truck stops are more, places where truckers are resting. It's not your corner store that you go to pick up your lottery ticket. So the same kind of cannibalization doesn't exist. The other bad blood, humorously enough, is FanDuel, a company that bread and butter used to be daily fantasy sports, and some of these other DFS operators. During a panel, Cesar Fernandez, who's head of U.S. state government relations for FanDuel, couldn't help but throw a bit of a shot across the bow, saying there are companies today posing as fantasy sports operators, and they are running illegal sports books. He didn't name names, but Underdog, Prize Picks, people who actually are at the conference and represented and speaking with lawmakers about how to run their businesses were there, in addition to, the fliffs of the world that are under a class action lawsuit, but arguably are legal under sweepstakes gambling. Either way, it's an interesting thing how much times have changed in the past 5 years. 6-7 years ago, FanDuel was running DFS all over the place with very little oversight and regulation, and now they don't really like other people doing that. So that's an interesting bad blood to continue to watch bubble up and over. And then finally, I'm going to leave with blank space. There was lots of talk about iGaming at the conference and online casino expansion, but as we know, Rhode Island was really the only one to get it done this year, and even that was a very limited scope of what you're going to see in the state. Lawmakers were talking about that if you want to continue to grow and innovate the industry and keep the industry thriving, online casino has to be top of mind heading into 2024. Representative John Ford of Indiana, who tried and failed to get online casino in 2023 after a really unfortunate fiscal note that claimed cannibalization and was just poorly researched by the Indiana department that does these fiscal research notes, mentioned that he would like to come back next year and have it be a bill that is just pure online casino and present it instead as a gambling modernization bill. So we'll keep a lookout for that next year, of course. In the meantime, you can head over to SBC Americas. I've got all the comments from Kromboltz's Tipico keynote. I've got the news on Tennessee vendors, and you can see more of what's going on around the rest of the US iGaming space.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of iGaming Daily, brought to you in conjunction with SBC Summit Barcelona, being held at the Fira Barcelona Montjuic on the 19th to the 21st of September. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.